Well, first of all, Gundy, thank you so much for not only hosting this night, but my body of work for March. And um, just to what you were just saying, it is like such a gift to me as an artist that you trust me to come to you with, you're like, oh, I have some other ideas than what we initially talked about, and for you to trust me enough to give me creative freedom. Like, that is such a gift to me and allowed me to really explore without, the confines of having to produce something that you were used to and that everyone's used to. So thank you so much. Very meaningful to me. Thanks so much for coming. All this wind is hard. It's like my least favorite weather element. So thanks so much for coming and giving me some of your time. And it's so wonderful to see so many faces that I adore and respect and admire, and some new ones that I'm just getting to know. So thank you so much. I would love to just maybe share a little bit of how I got to this body of work. As to kind of what Gundy was alluding to, this is really different for me. And I'm primarily a painter. And my last few bodies of work have been primarily oil painting, and based on the really like the four elements of nature. So earth, air, fire, and water. My last two shows were about fire in kind of the actual and the spiritual and symbolic ways. But then also prisms was my last body of work, which it's a stretch, but it makes sense to me in the sense that it was really about color and light. So that's air to me. It's the vehicle of communication for air. Color comes through in all of that. So that really was the tie back to the natural elements for me. So how I arrived with water, and then this like really varied expression of water. This past summer, when I was really focusing on building this body of work, I started investigating Katharina Grossa. She's a German installation artist, and she is phenomenal. And her artwork exists really everywhere except in a gallery setting. She does all this wild stuff outside on these structures and houses and in warehouses, and her artwork like trickles outside into nature. And I just started to challenge myself, like, how can my artwork exist in ways that are not like a traditional painting on a wall? And so I started to try and translate my prism paintings into the three dimensions. And I went to Home Depot and just started like walking around thinking like, what can I make a sculpture out of? I'm a trained teacher, so I have like this kind of toolbox of being able to create in a lot of different media, but this was a big departure from paint and canvas. So I bought some construction materials, insulation foam, and polymer spray foam that you probably have in like the cracks of your foundation to keep the bugs out. And I just started messing around with them and created a lot of really bad art. But as I started to kind of delve into that, I realized that were starting to look like ice and glaciers and icebergs, and it just kind of started to develop. I was like, this is what I'm doing. This is water, which just felt so true to me in my like vision to interpret the life elements. So that's how I got here, and I think that part of that process for me is I started to define my why as an artist. I'm looking at Lelia because we've had so many conversations about why we create. My why really helps me arrive at my what. If I know why I'm creating, I can really figure out what I want to create. So I wrote a mission statement for my art, which is like, I create art to cultivate meaningful connection with the divine, with myself, with others in our natural world. And I do that by exploratory, creative pursuit of visual storytelling. So I consider myself a visual storyteller. And the story I'm telling with this show is water and our connection to it as human beings living in this water-drenched world. The more I kind of delved into the concepts of behind some of these paintings, the more I realized that to experience water in all of its forms is really what it means to be human. We are so deeply connected to water, in even a biological form, water within our bodies, salt water in our tears, you know. The birth of creation happened within water. Like, think of the birth of ourselves happening in the water of our mother's wombs. You know, there's just so many crossovers of what happens in nature happens in us in very like real physical ways of biology and our ecosystems, but then in like the symbolic and spiritual ways of just life cycles. And there's so much there to be explored more, but I tried to just take some different aspects of water and you know, I was portraying some in a very real form of, you know, being underwater or being above water, glaciers, waterways, ice, clouds, oceans, you know, just the very real things that exist within our world. But then also, as I was creating them, you know, there's all this internal processing that's going on, right? And it just, these connections of spirit and the physical felt just apparent and kept coming up for me. And so I hope that I was able to saturate my artwork with some of those concepts, even though they're not like directly spelled out for you. I'm sure I had a lot of other things in my notes that I didn't even look at. But I would love to hear from you all. If you have some questions, I'd love to answer questions about, you know, if you have questions about any specific pieces or my process, I'd love to answer those for you too. Like for this one, for instance, I'll show you, remind me, and I'll show you after, because I have a process video that I looked at I kind of captured all the different steps. But this is on a MDF panel, and the kind of main structure that you see here, this is all polystyrene foam. So it's literally insulation foam that you probably have in the walls. Yeah. Yeah. I've only worked with it a tiny bit. Yeah. It's a lot of fun. Absolutely. And you're right, it's attractive in the sense that I was cutting into it. So not only cutting in with like some knives and carving tools, but through this by accident, I learned that if you put spray paint on that foam, it actually, there's solvent within spray paint and it etches into it. But I use that in such a way, like to my advantage, that it's creating these like beautiful textures and different things. So I'm carving into it, but then when you open up the kind of structure of that foam and the acetone or solvent gets in it, it like eats away at it. So you get this like great texture in there that holds paint and resin. So yeah, that's a big part of it, how I created the structure of this. And then this kind of more bubbly parts of it are the polymer foam, the spray foam. That again, it's just like super humble materials that you could go buy right now at Ace or wherever, you know. And then I was painting it, and then the final coat is epoxy resin. It's like a 2-part epoxy resin. Yeah, so that's that one. And you know, there's some very like a lot. These are very similar to that process. These ones are oil paint backgrounds, and I actually was so I had never combined oil paint and resin before, so I was curious. And is it Robert Lococo? He's a awesome artist here. He does lots of birds, but he does resin and oil all the time. So I called him and I was like, "Hey, tell me everything." You know, we have so much to learn from each other as artists in our community. I'm so thankful for our community here. But so that is an oil painting background, and then these are again are the polymer foam that I just thought it looked like sea foam
Oh yeah,
so
definitely. I
much.
think it captured it so well.
Thank you. My friend Allison Danielle, she's a photographer. She just went to Croatia and had these beautiful photographs of sea foam. And I bought one. I'm like, I'm gonna paint this. So that was one of them that I tried to capture that.
So did you do the foam first and then the paint?
The paint was the first thing, and then I sprayed the polymer foam on like a plastic sheet, and then like used other things to like press into it and lift up to create this like bubbly, foamy texture, and then let it dry on the plastic and peeled it off and glued it onto the painting, and then did the final coat of resin to kind of bring it all.
So I know you typically frame the same framer. I recognize it. But this process, you had to frame first?
Yeah, you know, that's an interesting observation, and you're right. And I kind of played around with that because so this is a panel that normally you'd paint on this side of it, and I flipped it over.
So it's not the same framer that you use?
Well, I bought these just at Meiningers.
Okay.
They're just panel, like the cradled panel, but they were open back. They didn't have any brace or anything. And I just flipped it over because I needed something to catch the resin, right? Or else it's all gonna drip out. So I was like, how could I do that?
Frames first, and then
Yeah.
you started working.
Yeah. Yeah.
Resin. How did that work in this gigantic here?
Yeah. I had it set up on sawhorses and just let it drip off. So you can see on a lot of these ones, I just let the drips on. I like that. I did that with the paint too. There's something about like that capturing of the process that you can really see. I don't know, there's like this a snapshot of that. Yeah. And I let it, I let it dry for about a month before I worked on it. I would have loved to let it dry even more, but and when I was talking to Robert, who does that a lot, he would pour even earlier. Then he wouldn't wait that full month. The only thing I use linseed oil as one of my mediums, and it did yellow, but I like that. It's so kind of the happy accidents that come through, which I'm just so thankful that I had the freedom to explore. Thank you, Gundy. That I didn't feel so tight and confined that I couldn't let those happy accidents happen.
How often do those happy accidents freak you out at first?
Every time.
And then like,
yeah.
is it immediately like you get stressed about it, or are there times where you're like, okay?
Well, it depends if it's a happy accident or a sad accident. Because sometimes you're like, ooh, that did not. Yeah, there was a lot of work that didn't make it into the show. It just I learned what I needed to learn from it, and it went into the dumpster or got repurposed in some way, and that's part of it. That's part of the process. Yeah, thank you. There's something about how it saturates color that it really, and for the subject matter, it like heightened it, even more. So, yeah, I'm glad you see that too.
What do you want to tell us about?
Yeah, so I have clouds sculptures in the back, and the reason I bring that up is because when I was still on like thinking from the prism perspective of like translating some prisms into the 3 dimensions, I started to realize like clouds to me are like prisms. They refract and reflect light and color, and there was something so beautiful about that to me. And so I have some cloud sculptures in back, but then I realized like seeing when I was looking at all these aerial photographs of like these Arctic regions and icebergs and ice called calvings that float all in. I'm like, they're like clouds of the sea. And I knew like I had to create clouds of the sea hanging above our heads. So these are icebergs that, you normally only see the upper 10% or so. And then to be, now we are like in the depths of the sea, with icebergs above us.
So are these also layered foam that you carved out?
Yeah, these, funny story. I was looking for some sort of sculpture foam to carve these out of, and I was just having a really hard time finding some that I was either happy with the quality or that weren't like exponentially out of my budget. And these are carved out of cake dummies. So do you know like bakers have, these foam cake dummies are like that they make these cakes on for like their windows, right? You got to be resourceful as an artist, right? So I found these and like glued them together to make these structures and then carved back into them. My brother bought me this like hot knife. It's like electric, and it was so fun, just like slice into them. Yeah. So, but it's styrofoam. Yep. So styrofoam, and then again, I used spray paint as like an etching. So I carved into them to get the basic structure of them, and then spray paint on them to etch and get that texture. And then the more bubbly, again, the bubbly stuff on top is the polymer spray foam, and then painted it all and resin top coat. They are for sale. I was thinking they would look really cool, like in a stairwell or like an atrium or something. That too. With the resin on it, it does reinforce it quite a bit. So there's like almost like a shell. If it dropped on the floor, it would crack the resin. But it's pretty, if you dropped a painting, it would crack too, or be damaged. But it's pretty strong, like structurally. And the measure for success, like we have to define that for ourselves. And that, I think that kind of goes back to the why of why we create as artists. Like if we're fulfilling the why, then the other stuff's just gravy, and so even within feeling that failure, coming back from Texas was like, it felt like my tail between my legs. I was like, you know what though? Like I still showed up and I still created real, true art that was true to me. And Texans just didn't like it, So, that it's part of it. If failure is a real thing and an important thing, So on these, yes, the very shiny stuff is resin. It's a 2-part epoxy resin that's clear. And then I use different alcohol ink to tint it, that kind of turquoisey.
So did you tint a layer to more depth of like that darker blue and then go lighter to the higher?
So sometimes for this one, it's a painted background. So I painted, it was all white, and I painted this first. And then, so this was all white, this was painted then, and then I tinted the resin and did a pour over the top.
Got it.
So it kind of gives that illusion.
There's so much
depth,
like
but
all of them. I'm like, how did you? Yeah, I'm like, how did you on those corners get it? It's crazy. It looks so deep.
Thank you. Yeah. I think that there's this organization called the ICE Survey. It's actually, Lelia, you turned me on to the researcher. His name's escaping me. He's out of Boulder, but he did this like long case study on glacier melt and things, but did these like time-lapse photos, and it just blew my mind. So I was looking at all of those images, but I didn't try to recreate them, like they were in real life. It's like I felt like I had this catalog in my head that I was feeding myself these images, and then I just, when I got to it, I would just sketch out some ideas in my sketchbook and then just do it directly. So yeah. I think I've started to refer to myself as a multidisciplinary artist, and people are like, "What does that mean?" I don't know. You tell me. Yeah. Maybe I'm a painter that sculpts occasionally, or a sculptor that paints most of the time. I'm not sure exactly. Yeah. I mean, I guess a lot of these are technically called relief sculptures. So, and then these would be more sculptures in the round, and you know, we could come up with a name. I'll take votes. Well, it's been such a wonderful audience. Thanks for participating. Thank you so much.